On a quiet stretch of countryside, inside a place once called Manor Farm, a group of farm animals gathered after sundown. They filed into the old barn, breathing in the dusty air, sensing that something unusual was about to begin. These animals were ordinary in appearance, but carried the bruises of their reality on their backs. Horses with sore muscles, cows whose milk never belonged to them, chickens that worked harder than their frail bodies should allow. And in the center of this dimly lit meeting stood a massive, aging boar. Old Major, the animal they trusted as the wisest among them. Old Major lifted his heavy head, scanning the crowd with eyes that had witnessed too many harvests. In a voice that trembled between exhaustion and conviction, he spoke about the truth they all secretly knew, yet never dared articulate. He told them that the lives they lived were not lives at all. They worked from dawn to dusk, produced milk, eggs, wool, and muscle, yet owned nothing. Everything they created, everything they sweated for, belonged to the farmer. And the farmer gave them just enough food to survive, never enough to thrive. Old Major asked a question that hung in the air with a quiet sting. If the animals created everything on the farm, why did they live as prisoners while humans controlled it all? The animals listened, spellbound. Each word pressed against their ribs like a long-buried truth resurfacing. Old Major described the cruelty of humans as a species that produced nothing, yet consumed everything. He explained that humans exploited the labor of animals without giving them any stake in their own existence. He told them that their misery was not destiny, but design, and design can be undone. Even the simplest animals felt the meaning in his voice. The sheep, usually lost in their own woolly haze, quieted. The hens tucked their heads under their wings, listening. The dogs sat still, their tails frozen mid-swing. Then Old Major shared something more powerful than any argument, a dream, a vision of a world where animals lived free of oppression and free of the whip. A world where every animal worked for themselves and for each other. A world where the farm belonged to those who plowed the fields and sowed the seeds. He taught them a revolutionary song he believed embodied their future. A song of unity. A song that spoke of fields without slavery and barns without masters. When the animals began singing together, their voices filled the night with a trembling hope. It was the closest thing they had ever felt to freedom. But hope is fragile, and the world does not always wait for it to grow. Only a few nights after that meeting, Old Major died peacefully in his sleep. The animals mourned him, but his words refused to fade. The fire he lit began to spread. Two young pigs, Napoleon and Snowball, stepped forward as the natural inheritors of his vision. They studied his teachings, analyzed his ideas, and shaped them into a philosophy they called animalism. They whispered it through the farm like contraband knowledge, urging the others to imagine what a life without human rule could be. The pigs were the most intelligent animals on the farm. Napoleon was quiet but calculating, with a stare that weighed every situation. Snowball was energetic, articulate, and creative, passionate about educating the others. They organized secret meetings, teaching the animals the principles of animalism, equality, solidarity, rebellion against tyranny. They insisted that the farm did not belong to Jones, the drunken farmer who ran it, but to the animals who worked it. Not all animals understood. The horses, Boxer, and Clover tried their best to memorize the new teachings, though reading was difficult. The sheep, easily confused, kept forgetting the details, but Snowball simplified the ideas. He carved 7 commandments on the barn wall, 7 laws to guide every corner of their future society. All animals are comrades. No animal shall wear clothes. No animal shall sleep in a bed. No animal shall drink alcohol. No animal shall kill another animal. And most importantly, all animals are equal. The commandments glowed on the barn wall like a promise. Soon the tension across the farm turned into a spark. Jones, drunk and negligent as always, forgot to feed the animals. Hunger ripped through them. For years they had endured working with empty stomachs, but something was different now. They remembered old Major's voice. They remembered the promise of freedom. When Jones arrived with a whip instead of food, the animals snapped. A wave surged through them. No one planned it. No one commanded it. But the collective instinct of survival and dignity rose like a storm. They pushed back, driving Jones and his men out of the gate. The humans fled in panic, abandoning buckets, tools, and half-finished tasks. The farm fell silent. Then, slowly, the silence transformed into awe. For the first time in their lives, the animals stood on land that belonged to them. The rebellion had succeeded. Joy surged through the barnyard like wind fluttering an open flag. The animals galloped, they laughed, they cried, they raced from building to building, taking in the reality of their liberation with wide eyes and trembling legs. And then came the most emotional moment of all. Together, they marched to the farmhouse, the place where Jones lived, but refused to inhabit it. Instead, they turned it into a museum, a monument to everything they overcame. Morning arrived with a strange kind of brightness. For the first time, the animals woke, not as slaves, but as owners. They looked out over the fields, realizing that the land they plowed would now feed them, not the farmer's pocket. Napoleon and Snowball gathered everyone to the barn wall and, with solemn ceremony, replaced the sign Manor Farm with their new name, Animal Farm, a fresh identity for a new world. Under the leadership of the pigs, the animals began organizing their new society. The commandments guided every decision. They called each other comrades. They worked harder than ever, but the labor felt meaningful. Boxer, the strongest horse, adopted a new motto that embodied the spirit of the revolution. I will work harder. His muscles rippled with purpose as he pulled plows, lifted stones, and carried heavy loads with unwavering loyalty. But even during these early days of victory, subtle shifts were already taking shape. The pigs took charge of organizing work and planning production. They argued that their intellectual labor justified them consuming milk and apples. Squealer, a small pig with a quick tongue, convinced the farm that such privileges were not selfish but necessary. He warned them that without the pig's intelligence, Jones would return. Fear, well-placed and well-timed, can be more powerful than any whip. Snowball and Napoleon debated constantly about the direction of the farm. Snowball believed in progress and innovation. He proposed a windmill, a grand idea that could generate electricity, heat the stalls, and lighten the workload of every animal. His speeches inspired many, stirring imagination and optimism. Napoleon dismissed the idea as nonsense. The tension between them grew thicker each day, a quiet friction under the surface of unity. Yet, for the moment, the animals continued working with pride. They believed they were building something historic, something old Major would have wanted, something that could become a model for farms everywhere. They marched past the barn wall each day, glancing at the commandments as if checking their own hearts. And slowly, without realizing it, they were learning the first painful truth of revolution: that the enemy does not always need to return. Sometimes the enemy can grow from within. Life on Animal Farm settled into a rhythm that felt, at least on the surface, like the future old Major dreamed of. Fields buzzed with activity. Workhorses pulled with purpose. Hens laid eggs for the collective good. Even the sheep, confused as they often were, bleated their slogans with innocent pride. Every sunrise felt like a renewal of victory, a reminder that they had overthrown the humans and reclaimed their destiny. Yet beneath that pride, a quiet shift was unfolding. The pigs had begun to separate themselves from the others, not through force at first, but through language. Snowball held passionate meetings, teaching the animals to read and write. He drew diagrams in the soil, teaching them the history of revolutions, the psychology of obedience, and the mechanisms of power. The animals admired him, though few fully understood him. Napoleon rarely spoke, but his silence held a weight the others sensed. He watched Snowball lead with charisma, and something inside him hardened. Every week, the debates between Snowball and Napoleon grew louder, sharper, more polarized. Snowball championed innovation. He believed the farm could become a beacon of progress. His proudest idea was the windmill. He envisioned a towering structure of spinning blades that would bring electricity, warmth, and ease to the animals' lives. He explained how electricity could run tools, heat, water, and reduce labor across the farm. His voice burned with conviction, and the animals found themselves dreaming through his dreams. Napoleon rejected the idea with cold certainty. He insisted that the windmill would drain their energy. He warned that Snowball was a reckless visionary who cared more about impossible schemes than real security. Squealer trailed behind Napoleon, spinning explanations like silk, assuring the farm that their leader understood deeper truths they could not yet grasp. Whenever the animals questioned why the pigs made certain decisions, Squealer responded with a mixture of fear and affection. "Do you want Jones to come back?" The words worked every time. The animals backed down, the fear of the old whip stronger than their desire to argue. As weeks passed, the pigs claimed more privileges for themselves. They moved into the farmhouse, a decision justified by Squealer with that same polished logic. The leadership needed quiet. They needed comfort to think clearly. They needed the environment suited to their intellectual burden. And the animals, weary from work and fearful of losing the stability they had finally gained, accepted the shift. They told themselves that sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. Still, Snowball fought on. He wanted a farm where sparks of learning, progress, and equality could bloom. He taught the animals committees, literacy lessons, and farming innovations. A fire of purpose burned in him, but Napoleon had already chosen his strategy. He was done debating. He had begun training the 9 puppies he secretly took from their mothers. Away from the farm, in hidden corners of the property, he molded them quietly. By the time they grew into dogs, they no longer barked in play. They growled with allegiance. Their eyes reflected Napoleon's will. The day of the vote arrived. Snowball presented the windmill plan with passion, drawing blueprints across the barn floor. His speech soared. He painted the future vividly. Warm stalls in winter, running water, machines to lighten every burden. By the time he finished, the animals breathed as though he had opened a door to a bright new age. When Napoleon stepped forward, he did not offer a counter-argument. He simply gave a signal. The barn shook with snarls. The 9 dogs burst through the doorway, their jaws bared, their eyes burning with obedience. Snowball froze for a single moment, then instinct carried him. He ran across the field, hooves pounding against the earth as the dogs chased him, snapping at his tail. He leaped the fence by inches and disappeared into the fields beyond the farm. The animals watched in horror. Not a single word was spoken. Snowball, the dreamer, the teacher, the firebrand, was gone. Napoleon climbed onto the platform where Snowball once stood. He faced the animals with the calm of someone who knew he now controlled every corner of their world. He declared that the debates were finished. There would be no more votes, no more open discussions, no more confusion. Decisions would be made by a committee of pigs, led by him. The animals stood stunned, but the dogs, circling at his feet, silenced every thought of protest. Squealer arrived shortly after, smoothing the edges of fear with a voice thick with practiced sincerity. Snowball had always been dangerous, he said. Snowball was ambitious. Snowball was a traitor. Snowball had plotted with humans to betray the farm. The animals were troubled but confused. They remembered Snowball fighting bravely during the Battle of the Cowshed. They remembered him taking charge, inspiring them, protecting them. But Squealer's voice did something to memory. He rewrote it with such confidence that the animals began doubting what they had seen with their own eyes. If leadership says Snowball was a traitor, then perhaps their own memories were mistaken. Time moved on in unsettling ways. Napoleon announced that the windmill would be built after all, claiming that it had been his idea from the beginning. The animals murmured in uncertainty, but Squealer reminded them that Napoleon's wisdom operated on levels they could not comprehend. Boxer, the loyal workhorse, responded with his famous motto, "Napoleon is always right." He pushed himself harder than ever, hauling massive stones for the windmill. His muscles shook under the weight, but he kept going. The animals admired Boxer deeply. His strength was their hope. His loyalty was their anchor. The pigs, meanwhile, began altering the commandments on the barn wall ever so subtly. The rules remained familiar from a distance, but up close they had changed. No animal shall sleep in a bed. Now read, no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. No animal shall drink alcohol became no animal shall drink alcohol in excess. The animals felt confused, but each time someone spoke up, Squealer reassured them that their memories were faulty. The commandments had always read this way, and because the animals had never learned to read deeply, they accepted the changes. The farm worked harder than ever. The windmill rose slowly under grueling labor. Storms knocked it down. The animals rebuilt it. Hunger crept into their lives again, not from human negligence now, but from the weight of the pigs' ambitions. And still the pigs grew fatter, their skin smoother, their privileges more obvious. They claimed more milk, more apples, more rest, more freedom from manual labor. They even brewed beer, distributing it among themselves, while offering the animals nothing but promises of a brighter future that never arrived. Every hardship, every shortage, every failure was blamed on Snowball. Squealer insisted he crept into the farm at night, sabotaging everything. He blamed Snowball for broken tools, spoiled grain, missing items, damaged walls. Snowball became a phantom of fear, a ghost story villain used to justify anything Napoleon wanted. The animals accepted it because Squealer always spoke with numbers, charts, and confident explanations that made their own uncertainty feel like stupidity. And so the farm began sliding into a darkness disguised as order. Work hours increased. Rations decreased. Surveillance tightened. Napoleon rarely appeared in public without his dogs and a dramatic entrance. He began taking on titles that inflated his importance: father of all animals, protector of the fold, friend of the ducklings, miracle of the cowshed. The animals applauded mechanically, though something inside them felt hollow. The revolution that once promised equality had begun reshaping itself into something eerily familiar. The whip was gone, but fear had taken its place. Jones no longer lived in the farmhouse, but another figure had quietly moved into his chair, and the animals, exhausted and confused, continued obeying because the alternative felt unthinkable. They had fought so hard to be free. It had never occurred to them that tyranny could return wearing a different face. The windmill stood, finished at last, glimmering in the cold morning light, like a monument to everything the animals had sacrificed. Boxer's hooves were cracked, Clover's spirit dimmed, the hens grew thin. Yet, despite their exhaustion, they felt a flicker of pride. They had built something grand with their own bodies. They believed it would finally ease their burdens. Then the humans returned. Frederick from Pinchfield Farm, along with his men, launched a sudden attack. Explosives tore through the windmill. The structure the animals had poured their hope into collapsed in a deafening cloud of stone and dust. When the air cleared, only a crater remained. Boxer stared at the destruction with a trembling jaw. His heart broke, not because the windmill fell, but because he had believed so deeply in a future that no longer stood before him. Napoleon raged, declaring Frederick a villain of unparalleled evil. Squealer insisted that this was proof of Snowball's secret alliances with human forces. The animals, still stunned, nodded out of habit. They could no longer distinguish truth from the stories they were fed. They only knew that anger was expected of them, and so they felt it. Napoleon ordered a great victory celebration, though the animals stood among ruins that did not feel like triumph. Winter arrived with sharp cruelty. Food rations dwindled until even hunger lost its sharpness and became a dull ache. Snowball continued to exist as a convenient shadow enemy blamed for every misfortune. Squealer's nightly speeches rewrote the past faster than the animals could question it. Meanwhile, the pigs expanded their comfort. They brewed more beer. They altered more rules. They issued more orders from behind closed doors. The commandments on the barn wall continued shifting. The animals squinted at the letters, unsure if they remembered incorrectly or if the paint itself had betrayed them. When they complained, Squealer appeared with sympathetic eyes and a tone of patient disappointment. He reminded them that leadership required sacrifices, that their memories were unreliable, and that the pigs suffered more on their behalf than the animals could ever understand. The farm felt heavier now. The energy that once pulsed through it had faded. The animals aged faster. Boxer, who had once pulled the nation forward with his strength, no longer moved with the same power. He pushed himself relentlessly, whispering his mottos whenever his legs trembled. "I will work harder. Napoleon is always right." The words had once fueled him. Now they drained him. One day, while hauling stone for the third windmill, his legs buckled beneath him. He collapsed on the field, unable to rise. He apologized to Clover as she rushed to his side. He believed he had failed the farm. He believed he had not been strong enough. Clover nuzzled him gently, willing his body to rise, but Boxer's breaths came shallow. When news of his collapse spread, Napoleon sent a van marked with a veterinary symbol. The animals, relieved, watched their most loyal comrade being taken away to receive care. Benjamin, the donkey, squinted at the writing on the side of the van. His eyes widened. He called out desperately. The words did not say veterinary service. They said horse slaughter. The animals panicked, chasing the van and shouting Boxer's name until their throats burned. But the van rolled away faster than their legs could carry them. Squealer arrived hours later with a prepared story explaining that the van had been recently purchased and not yet repainted. He spoke with sadness and reverence, claiming Boxer had died peacefully in the hospital, praising Napoleon's generosity for providing for him. And though Benjamin knew the truth, the other animals accepted the lie because to reject it meant accepting a world too cruel to survive. The seasons turned. More pigs were born, each one growing rounder and more comfortable than the last. The dogs patrolled the farm with an authority that needed no words. The other animals worked in silence, their spirits dulled by fatigue. The revolution that had once felt like a sunrise now felt like a memory slipping into shadow. Then, one evening, something happened that silenced the farm. The pigs walked out of the farmhouse on two legs, not one or two, but all of them, wobbling at first, then striding with practiced confidence. Napoleon led them, carrying a whip in his trotter. The animals stared, stunned. The core of their identity split open. Two legs had always been the mark of the oppressor. Two legs had always been the line they believed could never be crossed. The sheep burst into their rehearsed chant before any animal could speak. 4 legs good, 2 legs better. Their voices drowned out the gasps. Their bleating erased protest. The wind carried their words until dissent became unthinkable. Later that night, the animals crept to the barn wall for clarity, desperate to find the commandments that once defined their world. Only one line remained. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. The sentence sat on the wall like a mirror that no longer reflected truth but demanded obedience. The animals felt the final shift inside them. Something had ended long before this moment, but now its absence was undeniable. The pigs invited human farmers to the house. Through the farmhouse windows, the animals watched men and pigs drink together, laugh together, speak the same language of deals and profit. Napoleon raised a toast praising cooperation between species. He announced that the farm's name would no longer be Animal Farm. It would return to Manor Farm. The humans applauded. The pigs applauded. The animals outside stood motionless, faces blurred together in the lamplight. Pigs leaned forward. Humans leaned back. The outlines between them shifted like mist. The animals strained their eyes until reality settled with a weight that pinned them in place. They could no longer tell which faces belonged to men and which belonged to pigs. The revolution had devoured its promise. The dream that once lifted their hearts had twisted into its own reflection. Freedom had transformed into a shape that looked precisely like the tyranny they once overthrew. And the animals, trapped in the cycle they never understood, returned silently to their work, carrying the burden of a truth they could no longer speak.